almost every city, every location has some reason why you need to have parasite control through all 12 months. And we've done all kinds of work showing that, in fact, you will see fleas in the winter, you will see ticks in the winter as well. Sometimes they're not very visible, but they're there and still causing problems. Although now what we have is the chance to come back and revisit this compliance question and change the discussion, change it in a way that I think will really help veterinary practices.
Hello, VetFolio Voice listeners. Welcome back. Thank you for joining me. This episode was sponsored by Merck Animal Health, and in it, I was joined by Dr. Rob Armstrong, who sat down with me on a beautiful Friday afternoon to talk about a product that's creating a lot of buzz in the veterinary community, both among veterinary professionals and pet owners, and that is, you guessed it, Bravecto Quantum, or Fluorolaner for extended release injectable suspension. The idea of protecting pets from fleas and ticks with a single yearly injection while also taking a lot of the compliance challenges off the table is really exciting. But of course, with all that excitement comes plenty of questions around safety, efficacy, indications, contraindications. So lucky me, I got to sit down with Dr. Armstrong and ask so many of those questions. So if you're like me and you want to learn more about Bravecto Quantum, stick around because we're going to talk about it. Dr. Rob Armstrong is originally from Canada and earned his DVM degree in 1982 and his doctorate of veterinary science and pathology in 1989. He has experience in private practice and as a global marketing director for Merck Animal Health in the USA. He was a professional services veterinarian for companion animal ectoparasite products for Merck Animal Health, based in the Pacific Northwest. Dr. Armstrong is author and co-author of peer-reviewed publications on animal health topics and has been an invited speaker at national and international conferences. Merck Animal Health is pleased that Dr. Armstrong can provide audiences with insightful presentations on issues in companion animals based on his wide experience and background in many aspects of animal health and disease management. All right, let's jump in and learn more about Bravecto Quantum.
Nutrition is the cornerstone of our patients' health and happiness. The veterinary healthcare team should be the ultimate source for top-notch pet nutrition info. When clients see how the right diet helps their pets stay healthy and happy, they visit us more often. Remember, good nutrition is essential. It's smart business and great medicine. Enroll in the NAVC Pet Nutrition Coach certification today on vetfolio.com.
Well, I am looking forward to this much anticipated talk with Dr. Rob Armstrong, and we're going to talk about something that we all want to know more about. Let's talk about Bravecto Quantum Fluorolaner for extended release injectable suspension. Dr. Armstrong, thank you so much for joining me to talk about this.
Hey, Cassie, it's really great to talk to you as well. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. What a great product that we have a chance to discuss here.
Yes. I think we all have lots of questions about it. So let's dive in. You know, I certainly have been practicing long enough to remember practicing and trying to control fleas and ticks prior to the availability of Loner drugs. Yet over the last, 10 to 12 years, we've seen the availability of more and more just really great options for controlling fleas and ticks. Unfortunately, even with these amazing options, we still see fleas and ticks causing problems in household pets in particular. So knowing that we have the availability of very effective options for controlling these parasites, why do you think we're still seeing them as so much of an issue?
Yeah, great question. And really, there's really one basic problem we can still point to in spite of all of the wonderful options out there for flea and tick control and protection, and that is a lack of compliance. And we've done studies around the world looking at pet owner compliance, and we just know that most pet owners still only come to the veterinarian and get a product to treat for fleas and ticks once a year, and they use that product one time, and then they kind of seem to just tick along. Tick along, that's a terrible word to use, I know, but just get along throughout the year using only that one dose, and they just don't come back and redose their pets, and as a result, fleas continue to infest the household, and also they continue to be at risk for ticks when going out into the parks and into for hikes and so on. So that really is the big problem. We do know that wildlife and feral dogs and cats can act as reservoirs and maintain these parasites once you're outside the home. And so if you don't control fleas and ticks year round, you're going to see fleas and ticks still, and that's why there's still a problem, and it's compliance.
And I think that certainly echoes what many of us are seeing out in private practice is we're really trying to send the message of all pets in the household need to be protected and ticks are an issue year round and so are fleas, especially here where I am in Florida. But yes, I do think that echoes what many of us are seeing. Is there any additional data when it comes to compliance patterns? What are we seeing with compliance patterns as far as what the barriers are that are creating this, I'm going to dose one time and maybe not do repeat dosing or not do year-round dosing? Any data available as to why that is and how we can continue to combat lack of compliance and make sure that pets are protected?
And it's a really good question. And we've actually looked at this question really around the world, and we see a very consistent pattern in almost every country that we investigate and look at pet owner compliance. 86% of veterinarians recommend 12 months of flea protection. However, there's a compliance gap, and the latest data shows dog owners purchase only 5.8 months of protection, leaving dogs unprotected for more than half the year. And I think even within the veterinary practice itself, we know that there's a lot of pressures on that visit between the pet owner and the veterinarian. There's a lot of things to talk about. There's diets, there's teeth, there's what's going on. There may be some particular complaint that is bringing the pet owner, or rather than just a healthy pet visit. And we know that the flea and tick conversation often ends up at the front desk. And sometimes that's not the place where you're going to get the most impact on the pet owner in terms of how they should be acting. We also know that associations around the world strongly endorse year-round flea and tick control. We know from looking at the parasites and looking at the problems that these are year-round events. Almost every city, every location has some reason why you need to have parasite control through all 12 months. But sometimes I think people get this idea in their heads, well, we're into the winter months, and that's when we're not going to see fleas, we're not going to see ticks. But we've done all kinds of work showing that in fact you will see fleas in the winter, you will see ticks in the winter as well. Sometimes they're not very visible, but they're there and still causing problems. So I think it's a matter of communication, education. Although now what we have is the opportunity with Bravecto Quantum, and this is a product that uses the same active ingredient, pluralana, which we've had available to us for more than 10 years, but it's just applied in a very unique and innovative way and has approval in more than 50 countries worldwide. So Bravecto Quantum, I think, is going to give us a chance to come back and revisit this compliance question and change the discussion, change it in a way that I think will really help veterinary practices.
I have to agree. I feel like I've heard a lot of buzz around information about this product, certainly from the veterinary community, but also from pet owners. I feel like we have pet owners asking about this, going, wait, tell me about this year-round prevention, because you make several good points as far as compliance. You're right, there is a lot of pressure on that annual visit. There's a lot of things to talk about. And especially if we have a dog or a cat who maybe isn't covered and in fleas and ticks, and we're not finding a lot of evidence right in that moment, I think it's easy to kind of say out of sight, out of mind for the pet owner. They say, oh, yeah, yeah, you tell me this every year that I need this protection. I'm not having a major problem with it. Yet we as veterinarians see the problems that these parasites can cause. And so, we see the impact of lack of protection for pets. However, with the news around Bravecto Quantum, I think there is a lot of buzz, both from the veterinary community and from pet owners going, wait a second, we're talking, potentially one injection and more about this. So before we get into more about the product itself, can we talk about how increased duration of protection affects compliance?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And as a company, Merck Animal Health is really committed to the science of healthier animals. And when we look at the parasite control space, we realize that we need to find a better way to help pet owners and to help veterinarians and manage that whole compliance question, particularly as it just seems like the behavior of pet owners is not to be concerned about this. But as veterinarians, we really are concerned because we see those risks and those problems that occur if parasites are not controlled. And so what we wanted to do is find a solution that presents the opportunity for veterinarians to give a product one time,
and that will control fleas and ticks for up to 1 year.
and then when the pet owner came back again, it would be time to re-administer. And it would really give the veterinarian time to focus on those other questions, those other topics that are so important in the annual physical exam.
I know this product, you mentioned that it's available in more than 50 countries. I'm sure we still have data being collected and developed and things like this. Is there any data available for how this has affected compliance? I mean, do we see it being readily accepted by pet owners?
In the countries where Bravecto is launched, we see great acceptance by both veterinarians and pet owners. I recently had the chance to visit a city in Europe that has been using Bravecto Quantum. It's actually marketed under a different name in that area, but they've used the product for a year. And I was interested to see that in talking with veterinarians and veterinary practices, that it was the veterinarians' own dogs were the ones that were now coming up for the first re-administration, because when the product first appeared, they said, oh, this is something that we could really use in our own pets as well. And so great acceptance by pet owners and pet owners who are veterinarians who really know the importance of flea and tick control. But I could talk with you a little bit about some of the innovation that led to the discovery of Bravecto Quantum, because I think this is really, to me, the most amazing part, because we wanted to find a product that is very smooth, very easy. And so what we have gone with is a product where the fluorolana, the active ingredient, is in an aqueous suspension, so that there's no solvent, there's nothing that's sort of irritating or likely to cause reactions at the time of administration. And then when the product is administered, the way that the fluorolana is structured, the way it is formed into particles, those give us a very slow and very steady release of fluorolana over the whole year.
The dosing of Bravecto Quantum is tailored to each pet's specific weight for more individualized dosing. Because it is an injectable dosed as milligrams per kilogram, dogs will get an exact dose, not a dose range.
And that's because of this incredibly great approach to making the fluorolana available in this very slow, extended release particle form.
That is very cool. And that makes sense that kind of as an injectable form, we can really tailor the dose to our specific patient's weight and make sure they're getting the exact dose that we want them to rather than a range. And it sounds like, if I'm understanding you correctly, the way that this is formulated, like you said, it's in an aqueous vehicle, so non-irritating. And then when it's injected, these particles, I don't know if that's the right word, that contain fluorolana, they're slowly breaking down, and that's what gives us that extended duration. Is that right?
That's exactly right. And when I look at the pharmacokinetic curve that you get after administration, it's an amazingly smooth and steady release of fluorolana over time. And even looking at the error bars between different individual animals, there's relatively little variation. So that's really amazing.
That is amazing. Like, that's incredible to have this slow and steady release over such a long duration. I mean, I'm just picturing all that that does in terms of compliance. Let's talk efficacy. That's a difference in dose. That's a lower dose than what we're talking about generally with the oral chews. So what do we know in terms of efficacy?
And here the efficacy is very, very strong. When we look at challenges with fleas, when we look at challenges with ticks, when we look at field studies,
We see greater than or equal to 99.2% efficacy for that entire 12-month period against fleas, and greater than 94% efficacy for the brown dog tick.
which is one of the tougher dog ticks to treat. And with that information, we're very confident that you'll also see very strong efficacy with the Ixodes groups of ticks and the Dermacentor group of ticks as well. So it's showed amazingly good efficacy over that entire 1 year period. But there is one tick that's a bit more of a challenge, and that is Amblyomma americanum, the Lone Star tick. And this, if you've had experience using the oral Bravecto chew, which has 12 weeks of flea and tick efficacy, you'll see that with the oral chew, we get 8 weeks of efficacy for amblyomma. And when we look at the injectable administration, we get 12 months of protection against fleas, Ixodes, Dermacentor ticks, and Rhipicephalus sanguineus, or the brown dog tick. But when we look at the Lone Star tick, we get 8 months of protection. And part of this is related to the behavior of the Lone Star tick itself. It is a slow feeder, particularly in lab challenges. In the field, it can be quite aggressive, but in lab challenges, it seems to be a very picky tick. It takes its time to find the right spot to settle in and feed. And of course, with this type of product, the tick needs to feed to be killed. Now, when we look at the various studies that were done with amblyomma, some of them showed efficacy in the high 90%, even well past that 8-month period. But when it comes to a regulatory approval, it's that shortest time where you have a below 90% result. That tends to be where the regulatory agency will come down and say, this is your duration. And when we look at amblyomma, that gives us an 8-month claim. Still, 8 months for amblyomma is really the best option that we have out there. No other product can deliver that 8 month of efficacy over 90%. The veterinarians need to see how their individual field experience goes, but I do know with Bravecto Chew that many veterinarians have seen that their dogs are protected against ticks for 12 weeks with re-administration. But should the veterinarian decide that they want to administer at 8 months, they can for that particular concern.
Okay, so if we have a big concern for Lone Star ticks and there's that 8 month label claim and we wanted to re-administer at 8 months for that added protection, that would be a reasonable thing to do.
That would be an option. I think most veterinarians will find that's not required
Sure.
based on the tick challenge in their area. But if they wanted to, they could.
Okay. So just watching our patients carefully, just like we do with
Yeah.
any medication that we use and
Hmm.
making the best decision for that individual patient.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. We're doing that.
A question that always comes up when we're talking about extended release medications of any kind is safety. Once we give this, it's in the system for quite a long time. So what do we know in terms of safety with Bravecto Quantum?
And totally understandable. Of course, any veterinarian and any pet owner is going to think, wait, just a minute, I'm giving a product that's going to last for a year. Is this something I should be concerned about? And we have done some really intensive safety work to show that this is not something that should generate concern. The first thing is that in the overdose safety studies for dogs, that dogs were given up to 5 times the dose. So that 5 times, remember that one dose is good for 1 year. So a 5 times dose actually is the amount that a dog would be given for 5 years. And then these dogs were given 6 doses. So every 4 months, given 5 times for up to 2 years. So over 2 years, a dog would have received the injectable dose that would last for 30 years in a dog lifespan. So that's really a very high overdoses, and there were no clinically significant adverse events that could be associated with this treatment administration in the safety work. There was one dog, and I should just mention this briefly because you will see it on the package insert. There was one dog in the 3X group, not the 5X, but the 3 times group, that did suffer a disease called arteritis. And this was a beagle, and apparently beagles are susceptible to arteritis. This is a somewhat painful condition, and unfortunately, the dog was euthanized and postmortem was done. And in that particular case, it was confirmed as arteritis.
Sure, but certainly has to make it on the
Yeah,
label. No, I'm
yeah.
glad that you brought that up. Absolutely. When we're talking about safety, one of the well-known things that we are on the lookout for when it comes to any of the medications in this class is neurologic effects, seizures in particular with the Loner class of drugs. Any information on that when it comes to Bravecto Quantum?
Well, as a class member, of course, we have to be alert to the concern about neurological effects. However, apart from the dog with arteritis, no neurological effects were seen in the safety study. And there have been several extensive field trials looking, which would, of course, be then client-owned dogs, and they'd be protected at the label dose. And of course, we track very carefully. We really follow this very, very carefully to find out any adverse events that occurred. In the field trials, there were 2 dogs reported with neurological signs that will be mentioned on the label as well. One of those dogs had evidence of seizure before entering the field trial. The other dog developed seizures which were controlled
through standard medications. In the US field study with client-owned dogs administered at the label dose, 0.9% experienced seizures, which is similar to the estimated prevalence of epilepsy in the general dog population.
The other thing is when you look at the normal population of dogs, and I know this very well because my own grand dog is a husky, and she has quite severe epilepsy, which is controlled most of the time. But we know that about 0.9% of the dog population is likely to develop idiopathic epilepsy. And that was approximately the frequency. If you look at these two dogs across the field trial, that is approximately the same frequency. So although we know that neurological signs are something identified that you have to watch for, at the same time, we're not seeing severe neurological signs that are ongoing. And as far as the risk of adverse events, it's there, but it seems to be quite low and is not something where you're going to see ongoing adverse events. I do remember back in the days when we first started using daily heartworm medications, and then how we went to monthly heartworm medications, everyone said, what? You can't give a product that's going to stick around for 1 month. And then we were able to launch the 12-week chew, which really made a huge difference in compliance because we finally were able to outlast the flea life cycle with a single administration. And people at that time said, but what about the safety of a product that will last 3 months? And really, that hasn't been a concern. It hasn't been an issue. I think most veterinarians now are quite accepting of using a 3-month product. And they know that dogs can be lethargic and they can have diarrhea and may get nausea signs occasionally, but it's just not something that's not manageable. And now we're going to 1 year, and again the same question, and I think it's a very good question, but at the same time, I think that the answers are also very good.
I would agree. Everything you're saying echoes my clinical experience and my opinions that certainly it's something that I'm aware of whenever I'm using this class of drugs, but the number of times this actually becomes a problem is pretty seldom and generally very easy to manage with some minor adjustments for that individual patient. Really, it sounds like the incidence of seizures didn't occur at any higher rate than idiopathic epilepsy occurs in the general population, medicated or unmedicated. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. Yeah, not higher.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I want to kind of go back to what we were talking about in the beginning, where we talked about the pressure that's on that annual exam, all the things we have to talk about, all the things that we have to cover. How do you think having a product like this available can affect veterinary and client relationships and veterinary patient relationships for that matter?
Yeah, no, I think this is something that will become very important, and we will see some changes that I think will be very positive for veterinarians. Because first of all, it changes the nature of that year-round flea and tick protection discussion from one of being saying you should do this, you should do that, and have that conversation and purchase the products at the counter to much more of one. Well, let's just take care of that right now, and it's done. So that helps to build that veterinarian pet owner relationship, and I think it allows the conversation to focus on other topics that will potentially be of importance. The other thing is, and I think this is more of a commercial aspect, but I think veterinary hospitals are really getting pulled in several different directions with regards to prescription of flea and tick medications, where maybe online stores are sending them messages saying faxes saying fill out this prescription. Well, it used to be faxes, now probably emails or even apps saying, sign here, fill out this prescription, and then the kind of the pet owner is going off somewhere else and getting some other product, and who really knows exactly what the pet owner is getting and when they're giving it, and what their compliance is. And generally, the compliance is poor. I did remember one case where we were looking at this. We went to what ended up in the home of a person who was on one of these plans, and pull open that drawer by the fridge, and it was just full of flea and tick medications. They're getting these things, but they're never giving it, and that's really not going to help the situation in the long run. And then you've got a bunch of expired medications hanging around. I think also the conversation can turn much more, rather than a selling conversation, trying to sell, say, go stop by the front desk and pick up this or pick up that. It changes the conversation much more to one of, this is why year-round protection is so important. And I think that's a much stronger medical discussion, something that I think will really help in terms of what are the risks of diseases. We saw recently there was a person had the plague in California, and I'm hearing a lot of stories about flea-borne typhus. And we know that Lyme disease, Ehrlichia, Anaplasma, all these tick-borne diseases are out there. I think it's much more of a chance to educate pet owners. Well, these are the kinds of risks that can go along with parasite infestations, rather than talking about why you need to buy this product or buy that product. And it's a very easy administration, so it's a single injection. It does have to be administered with an 18 gauge needle, because we don't want to have the the particles disturbed, because you need to have the particles stay the way they come in the suspension in order to get that 1 year duration. But what I hear from talking with veterinarians is that has not been a problem at all. That's very straightforward administration.
Sure, sure. Yeah. And we've come up with so many tricks to, give injections and things like that in a way that keeps our pets, our patients low stress, that of the things I would say that wouldn't rank high on my concern list of, oh, I have to use a big needle to give this. I think you made a really important point of we can take care of this right now. Certainly with all of the things that we are able to do in veterinary medicine now, and a focus on low stress handling and making these visits a positive experience for clients and especially for patients. We do end up sometimes having to have a lot of repeat visits, whether it's for monitoring things or, we can't do that today because we need to sedate because your pet is too stressed or something like that. So a big question that I hear, regardless of what the recommendation is for a certain pet, is, well, can we just do it right now? I'm here. I took the time off work. I've got this day blocked off, afternoon blocked off, whatever it may be. Can we just do it now? And I think being able to say, this isn't something where we're going to send you an email and you have to follow up on it. This isn't something where you need to return to the clinic and purchase something else. This is something we can take care of right here and now. Sends a really powerful message. And like you said, it changes the conversation from more of a retail perspective to more of a medical conversation. And I think that that's really important because that's where our hearts are so much of the time. Of we see the diseases, we see the really detrimental effects that these parasites can have on human and animal health. And so if we can shift that conversation and you talk about it more from a medical perspective, I think that sends a really powerful message and helps our patients stay protected in a way that makes sense and takes some of the, any caregiver burden that a pet owner might be experiencing, really diminishes that quite a bit.
Yeah, really good summary. Bravecto Quantum can only be administered by the veterinarian, which allows for the relationship to be brought back into the hospital.
Try to get away from some of the connection with some of these outside sources that are trying to medicate pets.
Sure, absolutely. Well, Dr. Armstrong, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you joining me and having this talk with me.
Well, Dr. Fleming, great to talk with you as well. Thanks so much for your thoughts and for spending the time together.
Absolutely, it was great. Important safety information. Bravecto Quantum, Fluorolanar for extended release injectable suspension for dogs. The most commonly reported adverse reactions in a U.S. field study included lethargy, decreased appetite, vomiting, diarrhea, elevated liver enzymes, and pruritus. Bravecto Quantum is not effective against Lone Star ticks beyond 8 months of dosing. Fluorolanar is a member of the isoxazoline class. This class has been associated with neurologic adverse reactions including tremors, ataxia, and seizures. Seizures have been reported in dogs receiving isoxazoline class drugs, even in dogs without a history of seizures. Use with caution in dogs with a history of seizures or neurologic disorders. The safety of Bravecto Quantum has not been evaluated in breeding, pregnant, and lactating dogs. In some cases, adverse events have been reported following use of Bravecto, Fluorolanar, chews in breeding females. For use in dogs and puppies 6 months of age and older. For complete safety information, refer to the product label. Well, Dr. Armstrong, thank you. It was wonderful to talk to you. I want to say a big thank you to Merck Animal Health for making this episode possible. Thank you to everyone out there who tuned in, all of you listeners out there. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast to help other veterinary professionals like you find this and other great content we try to put out there. For more episodes, you can click on the Education tab on the VetFolio website, or you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. As always, we'd love to hear your input on this talk, as well as ideas for topics you'd like to hear from us in the future. So feel free to reach out to me at dvm@vetfolio.com. We can connect on Facebook at Dr. Cassie DVM, or you can find me on Instagram at dr.cassie.dvm. And remember, if one animal is better off because of you today, it's a great day.